Communications, specialize in end-to-end encryption, ephemeral messaging, serve a variety of clientele, government, commercial sector, and we also have a consumer-grade messenger as well.
Well, none of those things are topical, so I'm not sure what we're going to talk about, but or how we're going to talk about it for 30 minutes only. One of the things we talked about, diving into a little bit about, is the whole 5G network and the banning of Huawei and ZTE equipment, and what else hasn't been in the news? TikTok, you name it, and if there's something to do with the U.S. and security and China certainly, and other geopolitical influences, it's certainly, on the tips of the tongues of every person in the news organizations, and if not, security professionals, of course. So what's your take on 5G, and is it going to be a more secure network than what we have today with 4G and other data networks, or we just kind of have to roll the dice and see what happens?
Yeah, I think there's a certain element of rolling the dice here for sure. I think, taking from a security perspective, there's an awful lot of news about it. You see it's kind of a political football now between the United States and China for sure. Mm-hmm. Everybody wants an edge. Everybody's concerned that the other side is going to get some sort of an edge. As you know, the main concern is, what if we wake up one day and we realize that the entire 5G network is some elaborate, technology-based Trojan horse, right? That is siphoning data off to a foreign intelligence agency. That would be a bad day for sure. I think the point I would make just as a security professional is just that, these networks were probably compromised a long time ago. We, by design, if you look at a lot of communication networks, they weren't really designed to be end-to-end encrypted in the first place. Mm-hmm. As you know, Wicker is that's kind of our stock and trade, right? So we believe very strongly in full end-to-end encryption, which really takes the service provider and a lot of the risk associated at the service provider out of the equation, right? Which is a great thing for security. When you look at the 5G networks and even the current 4G networks, they weren't really designed like that. The service provider has full capabilities to read all the text messages that are going across it and see all and hear all the communications and video chat or whatever's going on. So I don't expect 5G to be much different. I certainly don't want an unfriendly nation having majority control of those networks for sure. I think that's a smart thing to fight. But even if my home nation has full control over the network, I still think as a security professional, I should realize that that doesn't mean the network is entirely secure. Foreign nations are still trying to attack it, still trying to compromise in some way. And if we were smart as security professionals, we would assume that these networks are somewhat compromised already, if not totally compromised, through illegal or illegal means. People have access to that data, so we should be careful.
You and I've been through, I'm sure, I have more gray hair than you do, but I know you've been around long enough to have lived through, bastion hosts and inside and outside the firewall, and hard exterior, soft interior, all that. Of course, when I first got into security, I'm like, I think that that's going to change very quickly, and it did. So even if you go to the zero trust model, essentially you're buying into the premise that nothing is secure. You have to not trust any element of the network or network device on the network, and that's certainly when you're a multi-vendor, international, could be partly sponsored by the government-built network or subsidized or privately built network. Yeah. There's just so many elements. You just have to assume that's not secure, and you've got to do your own security on top of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was really one of the fundamental premises that we used in designing Wicker. I mean, it was the idea that there's always a huge assumption that the service provider can be trusted. And maybe they can from hey, I trust that service provider. I want to trust all my service providers for sure that they're not going to do bad things with my data. But people can steal things from service providers, right? Service providers aren't perfect. They don't have some magic. You mentioned words like bastion hosts and things like that. They don't have some magic that makes it that their machines are unhackable. So that is certainly one of the zero trust model is something that we ran with, as I said, in the initial designs of Wickr in 2012, were that, hey, don't even trust us, right? I think we were one of the first service providers to come out there, certainly in the messaging side, that says to customers like, hey, we're building a tool that you don't need to trust us. All right. We're trying
That's funny. I don't remember any ads from Wickr that said, don't trust us, but I get what you're saying.
I don't necessarily want to coin that term, but okay. You're
not adopting that label, but I get what
no, I don't think marketing would approve of that. But I think that's the idea from a security purist. We want to make it so that you can't steal anything from us. And I kind of make jokes that, our encryption, we didn't want to design our encryption such that, I have to worry about black vans, driving by and pulling me into the van and hitting me over the head, asking for a key. Like we literally do not have access to any of them.
Things have evolved. We've gone from helicopters to vans. So
yeah.
How much has changed. Not to get too political on us here, but
it's still the $1.50 screwdriver that does quite a bit of damage.
Yeah, exactly. I'm curious, there's lots of ways you can approach this topic, right? What do businesses do? From network services that they're getting from whoever? What do we do as consumers of something like a 5G network? What about people that are using apps? I believe that we all agree to look the other way at some level, right? Okay, my device was manufactured where? And, the one I'm holding right here, right? Could have been from China or some other country that, might have some other interests besides 100% providing a secure product. Mm. How do we fix a world where that is happening, or you just assume that it's going to happen everywhere and you just have to figure out how to protect yourself?
Well, I think the security industry overall is evolving. And if you notice, we talked about zero trust. Zero trust is quite a popular term these days. Right.
Easy to say, hard to do.
Yeah, it's pretty much written on every booth, right? At RSA last year, and for good reason. It's a mindset that is taking off, and I think that is the best way we can insulate ourselves against the risks you mentioned. Do we have control over the entire supply chain? And how our mobile devices are created, our computers are created? No, we don't. We do the best we can. They say, right, light is the best disinfectant, right? Try to shine light on organizations, technology providers, technology manufacturers. Make sure that the processes are as good as possible, right? Secure as possible. But understand that there's some percentage you're going to miss. Right. Mm-hmm. And, but the way you insulate yourself against what you miss is through overlapping controls. And that's really what the idea of zero trust is meant to do. Right. If I missed it at, the edge firewall, for instance, that's not the last time I check the data coming in. It's not the last time I authenticate this traffic. And it's the same thing from messaging and on, right. It's assuming that there are certain things we're going to miss. We don't assume that all of our internal systems are secure, and we act accordingly, right? And hopefully through enough of those overlapping controls, we can insulate ourselves against kind of the provider or manufacturer that we missed that is doing something a little bit hairy.
Mm-hmm. I agree. I was just thinking about sort of the software element. I don't know how much you get into working with software teams. You're mostly dealing with network teams, but now you have the whole software stack, right? As well as, of course, all the network and virtualized or not, or NFV or whatever, however they may be implemented. Software itself is changing, moving to containers and serverless and microservices and service mesh. And I could go on with buzzwords, but that is really in some ways creating a more porous set of applications. I'm not saying it's a sieve, but a lot more piece parts to secure, make sure that the underlying kind of fabric that manages all that is secure. Do you get into the software architecture side of it? And I'm asking because I may be tilting at windmills, but I think one of the things that will help us all is to have security engineers learn more about software architecture, not to be developers, but so we understand what's happening on top of the network. And when developers are creating software, you have an opportunity to participate to help make it more secure. What's your perspective on that?
Yeah, I think you're right on. I 100% agree, and I'm not.
That's why I'm having you on the show. Thank you.
Yeah, I am not a software developer by trade. Being a co-founder of a company, I had to do every job. Right. So I did, I was a contributor in the software code base, but there are far better people than me, thank God, who have taken over since then. But if you look at the average code base, right, you look at Wicker's code base and compare that to a motherboard, right? If you look at a motherboard on a computer on a hardware level, and you think about how many different entities were involved in creating all those components, it's really not much different from the software side. Thankfully, a lot of the components now on the software side are open source, right? So the vetting that can happen there to ensure that component isn't coded in any hostile or malicious way is a lot more open and transparent process. We do it ourselves. It's part of our process to look at these things. But the fact that it's open source means that a lot more eyeballs can get on it, right? And verifying that software supply chain as well as the software that you create, we spend a lot of time internally, as I'm sure every company does that's interested in developing secure products, and ensuring that our internal processes involve things like peer review, making sure that no one person can ever push code into the production code base, right? Multiple eyes have to be on that. Set up as much automation as you can, trying to guard against human failures for the most part, right? And human failures, it's one thing for a mistake, it's another thing for intentional and malicious, right? And I think every company needs to be looking at that too. We certainly do at Wicker, and we put guards in place for things like that. So no one's really immune to it. And I think the only way we can, we just have to recognize what the challenge is and try to, again, put in enough overlapping controls to catch as much as possible. God willing, you catch everything before it gets into production. Right. But a good security engineering process doesn't end once it gets into production, right? There's plenty of testing that's still going on. We have bug bounty programs, public and private, again, overlapping programs, looking for issues all the time. And that's really the only way that anyone can stay ahead of it.
It's interesting. I'm not a hardware person, but I've been around kind of hardware design and testing and some things like that. And one of the things I learned about it is how many subsystems there are that go into a piece of equipment, right? Mm-hmm. Oftentimes it isn't like one monolith piece of software like there would be in an old application. And in some ways there's security in that, right? Because the subsystems they may have their own PKI keys that they use independently to all interconnect as part of, whatever motherboard or processor integration that happens with it. In some ways, and by the way, they run a lot of open source software on a lot of hardware, from your access point, on into the network. One of the challenge, though, has been keeping that hardware up to date, because oftentimes hardware businesses are sort of sell it and forget it. And that model is certainly changing and changed. Do you think as we move to a more software-based world, and I mentioned this because when we started talking about 5G, you're talking about the core being software and so many more elements, software-based radios and things like that. Do you think we'll see a much easier or more frequently updated network because we have gone to software?
I think it certainly makes it easier. How many people do you know regularly update their computer BIOS? Right on there.
Oh, I do that every night before bed.
Every night you check just to see if an update came out.
Yeah, I just take my vitamins. something.
It's the rare breed that really gets into, because it's a lot harder of a process, right? I mean, it's just human nature. Software, we have a lot of neat tricks where we can, open up the app and, hey, there's an update available. Do you want to automatically install it, right? I think I don't know that software deployed, let's say within 5G networks, it sounds like, that's not the type of software that you would want to be auto updating, right? Like, so I still think
a good way to make it onto the Wall Street Journal, right? The whole 5G network went down because Mitch changed some code.
Because Mitch pushed a change last night. Yeah, it seems like something at that kind of a scale that would be done with a little bit different of a process there. So I wonder if it would make it easier or harder, or faster to update networks because they're software versus hardware. I think ultimately it's operational security and it's change management procedures and everything that are going to dictate that. And I would think that, we probably find that they're pretty similar, whether it's software or hardware there on large systems like that.
Certainly sharing of some of the crossing those disciplines is happening. So maybe some of those things lessons learned, sharing some of that will occur. I'm curious too, because of your role, what your company does, what's on the minds of CISOs these days? I mean, besides remote work, and we talked about that on a previous video, but what's on the mind of CISOs kind of thinking forward of what's happening in business and technology and networks and software? What do you hear?
Well, I think the zero trust thing is certainly taking off, right? As far as just kind of competing for mind share of CISOs now, right? Whereas everything, was and still is to some extent a risk-based world, right? You think of things in risk and you say, here's where the risk is at my organization. Therefore, that's where I'm going to funnel most of the resources to address it. I think zero trust kind of moves that up to a little bit different level, right? So it's like, theoretical risk may be lower, but, thinking about it from a perspective of we can't just assume that because it's on the internal network that it's good traffic. We need to be, expending some resources on the internal network, doing things that zero trust tells us to do. That leads to a more secure environment overall. Even though it doesn't exactly match the risk models that CISOs used to look at, right? It's kind of more paranoid, I guess, the more paranoid way of look. So I think in some way, CISOs who are adopting that are taking kind of the more paranoid approach. And paranoid sounds negative. I would say measured.
More paranoid security people.
Measured and experienced together.
I'm sorry, right? I'm in a weird mood today.
Yeah, I mean that's sort of your job description, right? But those kind of two properties together sort of equals paranoid. So I think that's a big change, just in that kind of a mindset. And I think that the other thing you brought up about having the multiple products and multiple kind of supply chain issues. I think that's on the minds of a lot of CISOs too. You look at the average business today, they're not running their entire business on, one software suite like it used to happen maybe 15 years ago. Where it's like, hey, we bought this one all-encompassing. It does everything we need it to do. And that is our entire business productivity suite for our company. Like, the world's not like that anymore. There's niche products for, look at your phone. The average phone of an employee, your employee has 100 apps on it, right? And that kind of mindset that it's more of kind of like there's room for boutique things. There's room for niche products that aren't all encompassing. I think it's allowing the marketplace to move faster, first of all, right? So it's not like, in order to adopt a new technology, it doesn't mean I have to throw out everything, my entire system, which, I've been through some of those in places I've worked that have taken years to move from product suite A to product suite B. We know how that works. It's faster now, right? It's faster now. And I think that that kind of leads to different thinking in CISOs as well, where they realize that, hey, I have a certain problem and I can solve it with the application of a good product, and it doesn't necessarily need to displace or interfere with everything else, right? When I do that.
It's interesting because what you made me think of is when economic downturns happens, which are significant ones, and 2008 being, a more recent one, is supply chains get disrupted. And it's a super simplification of what really happens, because all those layers of complex relationships and dependencies between getting a product from A to Z, really not A to B, sort of get undone. And when you go back to either put them together the way they were or build new ones, some of those people aren't around, they aren't doing the same business, they're not at the stage that you need them to be able to respond, or maybe they're ahead of you. But oftentimes things get rethought in terms of supply chains, because I know Cisco, some studies that I've read, Cisco in 2008, when they went through that downturn, really rethought, instead of we get this set of products from this manufacturer because they have these kinds of optical interfaces, they went to more of a strategy of, well, I want, any number of suppliers that can give me the products with those optical interfaces, or can change over some other product families that I need produced. So they have multiple suppliers, but multiple kind of product lines or technology lines that they can, switch to, giving them a lot more flexibility. I just wonder what kind of things might have to be rebuilt today. And if you're sitting in the CISO chair saying, I'm worried about supply chain management, who knows what the supply chain even looks like yet?
Yeah.
So you're almost vetting your own vendors and their ability to kind of rebuild and reset. I mean, that'd be something I would be worried about, especially as a network provider.
I think redundancy is the key there, right? Like thinking of, the example you gave is just sort of a call out to say, hey, like we can't have any over reliance on any one particular supplier, just in case, that goes away. And I think we certainly learned a lot in the last few months, overall CISOs and just management overall, in that kind of supply chain. And I think, think about, I think people thought about things like, no fuel, transportation, and everything. But I don't think a lot of people thought about, well, just the workforce, not enough of the workforce. We can't have them contact each other. We can't have them work in the same place. We can't have them, they may be out sick. And I think that's probably a part that a lot of people weren't thinking about, in February of 2020, that they are now. Right. So, I think the technology industry overall was somewhat of a saving grace for us, because that is the one area that I think we've been able to lean on as a society, right? Things have overall worked. We've been able to order things online. We've been able to continue to have communications and secure communications, through this pandemic. Were it not for that infrastructure in place, I think, there would have been far more significant impacts to what happened, and I'm not minimizing the impact that we felt as it is in very human toll as well as economic. But the fact that we had that technology infrastructure in place and it hit us now, as opposed to 30 years ago, I think made a huge difference.
Oh, totally. Absolutely agree. I mean, it is pretty remarkable when you think about how well, whether it's fiber or, hybrid fiber, coax based, DOCSIS based network connections going into homes, how well it's held up. I mean, I wondered if we would see, on the headlines of somebody, this part of the country is networks are down because capacity, the usage exceeds capacity by so much demand. And hats off to the network providers. The ISPs have done a pretty darn good job of it. Now, maybe Wi-Fi in the home is another story. That might be being pushed with all the streaming services. But to your point, and I don't mean to monologue about this here, but the whole shift, the movement around digital transformation, the timing of it was very fortunate for us, because I've talked before about, in just a matter of days, Best Buy was set up to be able to do curbside delivery through their app and their website and their email delivery. I was shocked. I had to build a computer and I couldn't get one from my normal supplier. So I went and built one from 2 different Best Buy stores and shopping by what was in stock. Yeah, the ability to respond to that, and restaurants and delivery services and everything that's in place today, we're kind of spoiled, and again, not speaking to the human tragedy, because that is a whole nother, place we have to go to talk about. But on the other side, we're not wanting for food. We're not wanting for, getting services to our home, at least for the most part. Most Americans, probably globally, it's true also.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I was impressed. I live in New Jersey, and we were hit pretty hard, in March, April territory. And I think, like a lot of folks, especially in the beginning, the supermarket shelves were pretty bare. But aside from toilet paper, I was really impressed at how quickly those supply chains held up. Right. The supermarket workers, I think people were kind of doing their duty and not going to the store as often, but we really didn't do without, so to speak, from a supply perspective, that drastic, that radically. It was really the toilet paper thing is a mystery. And I can't wait to see the time when you interview the person that knows why that happened, because I'd love to see
every day. I dig farther right before I update my bio, so I go back out and check and see
if find out why
that person. Guys, I'm sorry. I'm just in a crazy mood today. I was thinking about all of the stuff when we started talking. We were talking about the political, geopolitical, what's real, what's not, and have things already been compromised for a long time, and we're just sort of know it but don't know it. I don't know about you. I don't see any of this changing anytime soon. I think internationally, globalization, suppliers coming from all over the country, and maybe even inside the country, there's always going to be boogeyman, right? That we're going to blame whoever. And there are always going to be conspiracy theories. There are always going to be legitimate concerns and suspicions. Can't get it all out, but that's not going away. I think it's just going to increase. I mean, am I off base here?
I totally agree, and I think if you just look at every country, including, and when I say ever, including the United States, right? It's we have a set of laws for surveillance of our own people. And then we have, it's pretty much for the rest of the world, it's Wild West. Like, it's every intelligence agency outside of the U.S. It's their job
to Geneva Convention for,
that's there
outside the country.
I mean, we're pretty sure that most other foreign intelligence agencies are trying to compromise our networks here. That's just the way the world works, and I can't imagine that ever changing. We even hear of so I'm saying, like, I don't think it's going to change. What I do think about, I think it's important for us as U.S. citizens to think about is, right now the United States is arguing against Huawei, right, and TikTok and so on. We're arguing from this moral high ground of, we should not allow that to happen. We shouldn't allow, Huawei to take over 5G because there's laws in China that require these companies to participate in national surveillance efforts, and that's danger to us. Mm-hmm. I think we need, which I think is great. It's a perfect moral high ground to be on. I agree with it. I think you need to be careful in the United States. If you look at some of the legislation that's being kind of like written up and being starting to be debated now, has to do more with U.S. surveillance and internal surveillance and breaking end-to-end encryption, putting in backdoors into services. The more we start talking about that domestically, I think that is the more we lose that moral high ground. And now it's just a matter of, now it's right out there and for everyone to see. Well, either the United States is going to compromise it or China's going to compromise it. Who do you want, right? I much prefer to be in a moral place that says, no, we don't do that here, right? We don't spy on our citizens. That's not, it's not part of our legal framework. It's not part of the liberty, as we know it here. I am concerned the more I see legislation like that, that we're going to kind of lose that moral argument, and we're going to be in a much more difficult place on the world stage.
Well, maybe we can learn some lessons from the Patriot Act, right? Whether you're for it or against it, certainly that's stepping into that arena of, okay, when can we, how can we? Of course, we are all kinds of political buffoonery happening with accusing people of doing things wrong or not, or when they do things wrong, even in the Patriot Act. Yeah, I'm thinking about what you're saying, and I don't like the term slippery slope because it's sort of like perfect storm. It's a phrase that gets used in every case that rarely does it really apply. But it seems that if you open that encryption door to say, yes, there is not a secure mechanism where you can truly be secure unless you can, get quantum computing to hack it for you, that it really does open it all up. And I think, even we know there's places around the edge, like people being able to break into Apple smartphones, iPhones, right? Mm-hmm. Even though Apple doesn't let police, at least we don't think law enforcement get into it. There is always going to be edge ways of doing some things, but whether it's moral or just kind of the liberty and freedom of it, right? Are we really going to let all of our privacy go out the window?
I mean, that's a different story if it's on the edges. I expect, and I'm thankful for us having law enforcement and intelligence agencies who are trying their darndest to break communications and such. Like I want that. And I don't know if I spent some time as a cybercrime investigator. I've done work like that. Totally believe that's
why I only talk to you over Zoom and no other insecure communications.
This is not a secure communication.
Oh no, really?
So, but it's not that I don't believe that they should be trying. I just think there's a line between that and rigging the game, so to speak, where there's no possible way for you and I to have a private communication over in electronic means, right? Because the game itself is rigged and it's impossible to do that. I don't see that as being very congruent with liberty at all. If I'm unable to have that kind of a conversation.
You were talking about so the checks and balances in zero trust in that model, right? If you catch it here, you catch it there. Human nature is someone will abuse something eventually, right? Everything gets abused. There's always going to be someone who, for whatever reason, decides not to play by the rules. And I think that's where those checks and balances have to be there, right? So if you are opening things up, somewhat in an area, whether it's for law enforcement purposes, there has to be a way that is, it's being used in the right way and not being abused, and there are consequences of whatever manner, to bring that back into line. Because it's when it's without that's when I think we're kind of it truly is Wild West, wide open West. And who knows? I mean, maybe it already is, and we're, any moment I'll be unplugged from the matrix and sucked down the tube and no longer be a battery for everybody else. But there we're really getting into conspiracy theories. But.
Well, I mean, the balance is hard to strike, and I think that's what a lot of security companies, certainly folks who are proponents of end-to-end encryption, like myself, I think that's what the points we're trying to make is that it's very hard to, security and encryption, works with math, right? Encryption in particular, right? And it's very hard to create the, perfect storm, as you say, system that would allow only the good guys to have access to it. Why? Because we trust the good guys always have our interests at heart. I'm not saying that's not a dangerous statement in itself, but that's a subject for another day. But I'm saying that is to think that that's possible. I don't know many technologists like myself who spend the amount of hours we do trying to make things secure that believes that we can actually still provide meaningful security if we're forced to build it with like one arm tied behind our back, so to speak. Mm-hmm. We just don't think it's a possibility to do that. So I think that's why most of us take the pure approach. Like, we either have it or we don't, right? It's very hard to have something in the middle that, only under certain legal circumstances can you break this encryption. Well, then it's breakable. Then a hacker is going to find that hole and they're going to exploit it.
Well, and what I hear you saying, tell me if I'm reading this right, is the comfort is in that you control it and you can trust it because of underlying, how it's built, what it's built upon, et cetera. And you can get into supply chain issues and all kinds of other things that might undermine that, but it's still within your control to make changes to it since it's end to end. And I think that has to bring a lot of solace to CISOs, network engineers, and all of us in this kind of interesting world we're in.
Yeah, and that's why you do that, and we other things try to be as transparent as possible with CISOs, right? So they can verify things like their supply chain, right? We things like putting your crypto out, open source it, right? Let people look at it, bring in third parties to look at it all you want, write reports on it, right? Transparency helps a lot. And I think that it helps CISOs make the right decision, right? The people who generally tend to be the most trustworthy are the ones that don't put you to, they don't force you to put all your chips on the table and trust me completely, right? It's we require you to trust us the least, therefore we're worthy of more trust. It's sort of like one of those paradoxes, but I think that's helpful for CISOs to work with companies like that.
Well, I enjoyed having you on talking today, and let's keep in touch. Things are changing so fast. I'm just curious where we'll be in a month or two and what the next thing kind of facing us will be, changing conditions, and whether it's economic or health or, geopolitical. Who knows what with the elections and all that. It'll be a crazy time for sure. We know that. But it will definitely be interesting. So I hope we come back on and we can kind of check in what the next thing is we need to worry about, or maybe where we've made some progress too.
It will be interesting. Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me.
You bet. Great. Chris Howell, who is a CTO with Wicker. Great to have you on.
CISO Talk, to hear how real-world CISOs are dealing with today's real-world issues. From enabling secure remote workers to accelerating secure cloud adoption, defending against a pandemic of security attacks and beyond, CISO Talk covers the cyber topics you want to learn about. With your hosts, Unisys CISO Matt Newfield and MediaOps CEO Alan Schimmel, featuring a revolving panel of CISO cyber experts. This is where CISOs talk. Join us on digitalanarchist.com and techstrong.tv.
Okay. That's going to call it a wrap for today's show for Thursday, August 20th. We hope you enjoyed the show. Tomorrow for Friday, we will have a repeat of a previous TechStrong TV. We will be back Monday on August 24th with an all-new fresh content show. Until then, hey, remember what I said about the GitLab Commit virtual event next week? You don't want to miss that. DevOps India Summit. You don't have to be in India to watch the DevOps India Summit anymore. And then stay tuned for more information about our Kubernetes Virtual Summit and our DevOps Experience virtual events coming in October. But that's going to wrap this show. For all of us here at this award-winning TechStrong TV series, this is Alan Schimmel signing off. Stay well, stay safe, stay strong, TechStrong. We'll see you on Monday.